All right. Well, let's open in prayer if we can. Father, I just thank you for this time and to be back with the TCCSA group and to just really, God, I pray that you would help me in communicating your creation, the flood, in a way that just can touch the heart and give your servants an apologetic tool, Lord, for strengthening our faith and encouraging those that are deceived in the world with challenges to what they believe so that they too could come and realize that you are the creator of the universe and that you flooded the world at one time about 5,000 years ago to bring judgment in. And the world is now reserved for judgment again by fire this time. And we pray that you would just help us to keep people from entering into that judgment by coming to saving faith in Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. God bless you guys. And so good to be back with you. And this is the beginning of our PowerPoint program that we're going to have today. And where the topic is dark predictions and NASA's blunders. And the resources for this presentation are Center for Scientific Creation, Walt Brown's website, creationscience.com. And more importantly, these days is hydroplate.org, which is a collection of all the different speakers that are and advocates that have this as a place to post information about the hydroplate theory. And Real Science Radio, kgov.com. Bob Enyart and I worked on some of the things that are part of this presentation when he was still here with us. And there's interviews that you can find on realscienceradio.com pertaining to the hydroplate theory, Brian Nichol, myself, others. And really strongly encourage everybody that's listening today to go to Brian Nichol's HPT Animations, which can be found on his YouTube or Rumble channel, or are all linked at hydroplate.org. Again, as I was introduced, I'm senior pastor at Calvary Church in Port Orchard. I was the next Navy nuke, trained in submarines and surface ships. And I emphasize this only for the final line here, which is Puget Sound Naval Shipyard Professional Technical Employee of the year 94. And the reason I got that is because I was working with a think tank group, which was to think out of the box to create improvements in time and money associated with cooling reactor cores on submarines. And so those innovations came as a result of thinking out of the box from what the Navy had been doing. And what does it take to think out of the box, which is so important for this presentation because everybody's stuck into the box of asteroid origins associated with the Big Bang paradigm or even the creation, at the creation week paradigm. The evidence doesn't support that. So we have to think out of the box. And Tim Leonard, a professor at Liberty University, made this statement, which is Brian Lauer gave me this. If you have the wrong perspective of the past, which we all know as creationist Christians, that evolution is a wrong perspective of the past over millions of years. Big Bang is a wrong perspective. You will have a wrong perception of the present and what's going on today and a wrong focus on the future. And this is what's caused the blunders that we see through NASA and European Space Agency and even Japanese Space Agency, because they're going to asteroids and comets to take samples, to land on them, et cetera, with a wrong perspective of how they got into our solar system. And to think out of the box, we've got to get out of the evolutionary Big Bang plate tectonic box and rely on the biblical text, which we know to be the truth. We know the Bible is the truth. We might misunderstand the Bible, but if we properly understand the Bible, then we know that's the truth. And the hydroplate theory of Dr. Walt Brown, which we've introed before with all of his background, MIT mechanical engineering doctorate and Air Force Academy professor. And his book now, the 9th edition, is very close to being printed. The 8th edition is out of print, but you can get them on Amazon for a couple $100. And but this presentation is based on Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory on the creation and the flood of Noah. And so what is the origin of comets, asteroids? What are the different things that people think? Well, the non-HPT creationists, people that are not advocates of the hydroplate and even critics of the hydroplate theory, say that the comets and asteroid must have been part of the six-day creation, which is not consistent with scripture. It's not even consistent with the evidence that we see, which we'll talk about later, and therefore cannot be true. Because in the beginning, last time I was with you, I big dealed this, that comets and asteroids have hit the Earth and certainly caused death in the past. And they are going to hit the Earth again, according to the prophetic scripture. And when God said in the beginning that everything he made was good, that excludes comets and asteroids being in our solar system with orbital paths that are going to cross Earth and collide with Earth. Evolutionists speculate that they're part of the Big Bang, leftovers from the Big Bang that came and into our solar system. And to their own admission that we'll see here in this presentation, it's not supported by the evidence that they keep on coming up with. And the hydroplate theory explanation is they were a consequence of the flood, that the flood sent debris up into space that turned into, coalesced into the comets and asteroids and even TNOs in our solar system. And all of the evidence that we're getting from space probes support this premise that it was water and debris ejected from this Earth into space and went into orbits around the sun that are now our comets, asteroids, and trans-Neptunian objects. And so the HPT in the Bible, HPT is consistent with 74 biblical references related to Noah's flood with 0 biblical contradictions. And that fact in itself is a very strong foundation for saying that the hydroplate theory, it has strong support from to be true, that it's an accurate theory. And so what does the Bible say? Here's one thing that the hydroplate theory, and only the hydroplate theory, is perfectly consistent with, and that is Genesis 7:11-12. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, for those who have been around the creation flood models for decades, you'll remember that many decades ago, Henry Morris popularized, along with others, that the windows of heaven here, that was the Bible telling us that there was a canopy theory of water above the earth, up and above the heavens, and that somehow it deorbited and came and landed on Earth. And so it was called the canopy theory. And that was almost everybody was believing that in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, and even some people today. But is that really what windows of heaven means? It says that the fountains of the great deep burst up or broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. I think this is a very strong another alternate interpretation of windows of heaven are open really strongly support the asteroid comet premise of the hydroplate theory. And the rain was on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. That's a strong, it strongly implies that under the crust, there was an ocean. There was a great deep ocean, and it burst up and it created a fountain of water that caused 40 days and 40 nights of rain. And the windows of heaven were open. And so then the next slide, I'm going to take some time on this, and you're going to see my cursor here. I'm going to call that a pillar, a crust pillar. It's not, this is a Brian Nickel slide. I got this animation, PowerPoint animation from him, and he has much better ones and more information at his YouTube channel, which is also at hydroplate.org. But this is a pillar, and in Job 9:6, it says that God shakes the earth out of its place and the pillars tremble. Before the flood, this ocean of water, which is called the subterranean chamber by the hydroplate theory, was all locked. There was not a crack, and it was all locked underneath the crust with pillars touching the mantle. And there would have been tidal pumping that increased the temperature and pressure of this water up above 705 degrees, creating a state of water called supercritical water. And it would have increased in temperature even above that, we know from the evidence of what's coming back from space, to thousands of degrees. And it increased in temperature, pressure, supercritical water in this area would have started dissolving different minerals and stuff in the bottom of the crust. And on one day, the crust ruptured. And when it ruptured, then this water pressure under hundreds of thousands of pounds per square inch, extremely hot, explosive energy, thermal energy contained within supercritical water, was released to atmospheric pressure. It went from hundreds of thousands of pounds per square inch down here to atmospheric pressure up here. And all the thermal energy down here got turned to kinetic energy going up this crack. And it would have had an explosive rupture that would have sent some of this water up into space and come down. So some of it would have gone up into space, come down as super cold water that and dirt that froze and buried the frozen mammoths. Some of it along the side would have gone up and just come back down as rainfall globally, a fountain that with global rainfall. And some of it, in the center would have achieved 25,000 miles an hour or 7 miles a second, which is escape velocity from Earth, and it would have jettisoned up and it would have gone into its own orbits around the sun. And it would have been pulsing. We're going to see when I animate this, when I hit the click on the animation, that this horizontal plate, continental plate, global plate at the time, would have been fluttering by the laws of physics and coming down and crashing into this area, crashing on the pillars, breaking up the pillars and sending debris out from the mantle area and the top of the crust up into space. And that's why we find some meteors, meteorites, meteors are in space, are coming through the atmosphere. Meteorites are ones that have landed, that they have extreme high temperature markings and stuff that it went up and came back down. Some of the minerals have markings that can only occur at thousands of degrees. So now I'm going to animate this, and you'll see that the crust is starting to flutter, and you see these electrical charges created in the crust. We now know as a fact, despite Dr. Baumgartner's rebuttal to hydroplate theory, that electrical charges would be created by the crust during this time. It has now become known, a well-established fact, that during regular earthquakes on Earth, severe earthquakes, that there are electrical currents generated within the crust that are being used. These things are being used to try and predict earthquakes. And you notice this fountain that went up, and so there would have been pulsing. At the time that this is opening, it would have been an extreme jettison, and it would have pulsed with very high velocity to launch the higher velocity items in the solar system, like comets and trans-Neptunian objects. It would have gone with a tremendous amount of water, tremendous amount of velocity to be ejected into space. So this is the hydroplate theories look at what happened based on Genesis 7:11 of what happened when the fountains of the Great Deep burst up. Now, the global rainfall cannot be by the normal hydrological cycle that we see on Earth today, because it would have been a thermal nightmare for the Earth. You can't create the energy to cause global rainfall, nor provide the energy to condense the steam that's generated. But a fountain is easy to conceive of, a fountain creating global rainfall. And so this is what it would have looked like from space. And we now know that the mid-oceanic ridge is a scar where the mantle popped up into the growing crack, leaving a mid-oceanic ridge 47,000 miles or thereabouts on the ocean floor. And the material that was leaving with great velocity was being ejected into space. Bob Enyart worked with Bob Enyart and I worked with an animator to try and make this animation as accurate as we could to what would have been observed from space during the rupture phase, what Dr. Brown calls the rupture phase of the flood. And you would have seen all this debris being jettisoned, big debris, smaller debris, down to dust that would have been expelled from the Earth. And I want to emphasize as well that at the crack, when the crack ruptured, we know the pre-flood Earth was full of extreme vegetation. And so everything in the crack that is eroding from the Earth's crust on the top that falls into that stream would have been, life, trees, animals, plants, even people would have been getting gobbled up by that hypersonic stream of water, and by being accelerated from zero, standing on Earth, being accelerated from 0 to 25,000 miles an hour in a couple seconds, would have turned your body, if it was you that was in that, it would have turned your body into nothing but floating pieces of DNA and organic molecules, which are being found on every asteroid and comet. They're finding organic remnants on comets and asteroids that they go to sample. And this is so important for our apologetic as Christians, because what the evolutionary minded astronomers and astrophysicists and everything are trying to do now is they're convincing our kids that although we can't figure out how life started on Earth, where we have all these ideal conditions for life for life to exist on planet Earth, they're saying that, well, we can't figure out how life came on Earth, but look at what we're finding in space. All these asteroids and comets have the building blocks of life. They have amino acids. They have these things that are necessary for proteins. And so that then, time and chance seeded planet Earth with bits and pieces of amino acids that decided to come together and make protein and make cells. And so that's what they're deceiving. The school system is deceiving people into believing, because we're not there to say, no, the life planet ejected life material into space, and that's why you're finding it on comets and asteroids. So we're losing a great apologetic here by not understanding this. And the other thing that is so important for this discussion is this animation is showing that along with the debris, big rocks, little rocks, dust, there would have been water, and the water would have been in space. They would have been molecules that are attached gravitationally to these debris fields, but the solar wind over time would get rid of the gaseous molecules of water and nitrogen and oxygen, because some of the atmosphere of the Earth was also jettisoned into space, which is why there's evidence that the atmospheric pressure of Earth is less than it was in the past. And so it's really important to realize that there was gases with these debris fields for a while, because that's what allowed all of the different debris being ejected and pulsed in the same direction with the same velocity for it to come very slowly come together, because the gas molecules would have slowed down the relative motion between these different items and would have very slowly come together and compacted into asteroids. And then the gas went away, which kept some asteroids to have moons, because the moon would have ultimately collapsed down onto the asteroid and being a contact binary, which we'll talk about. But as soon as the gas goes away, all the slowing down of all the different particles within that sphere of influence of an asteroid or comet stop. And wherever it was at that point, that's where you're stuck. And that is extremely critical. And if NASA, European Space Agency, Japanese understood that at a time in the past, that there was a debris that had a gaseous environment around it, and that would explain everything that you're going to see with their own words, they cannot figure out today. Because without that fact, you cannot explain what they find on comets and asteroids. So that's so then these debris piles came together and went into their orbits around the sun, as this last part of the closing part of this animation shows. So this is a very important, this is like, really pay attention to this too, because this is critical for the rest of our talk today. If you assume that Genesis 7:11 talks about the fountains, water, great deep under the crust, bursting up through a crack in the crust that was 47,000 miles under, with water that's supercritical and goes hypersonic. And by the way, when that water leaves the super hot, environment of the subterranean chamber and turns all of its thermal energy into kinetic energy, there's not a heat problem with that escaping water, that it would depressurize and cool off. And so if we just assume the fountains of the great deep were water that were launched with rocks and muddy water and organic material from the surface of the earth into space, then everything after the blue is a fact of physics. In fact, NASA could do a project of going into space and sending a debris pile with water, with atmosphere, sending water that would go into gaseous phase in space, and send it into space and send it into a velocity that escapes Earth. It would turn into exactly what they see on comets and asteroids if you could get enough mass to get it to hold together. But as the rocks moved further from the Earth, Earth's gravity became less significant to them, and the gravity of nearby rocks became increasingly significant. So consequently, many rocks, assisted by their mutual gravity and surrounding cloud of water vapor that produced what's known as aerobraking, slowing down a low Earth orbit satellite that starts to hit air molecules in our upper atmosphere of the Earth. As soon as it starts to hit air molecules, it's going to slow down and shortly after crash into Earth. And so there were atoms, molecules of water vapor in space along with all these rocks, aerobraking those items to merge to become asteroids. Just rocks that didn't have atmosphere, they're isolated rocks in space, are called meteoroids. And drag forces caused by water vapor and the forces produced by the radiometer effect concentrated most smaller asteroids in what is now the asteroid belt. And we even have, there's so much evidence of that we don't have time to get into. But every one of these missions, these NASA missions, were conceived with a wrong perspective of the past. The Temple 1 deep impact, which is we sent a space probe to go crash into the Temple 1 comet with a copper impactor that was going at thousands of miles an hour into this comet in 2005. You have the Stardust mission, which was launched to go fly through the comet tail of the Build 2 comet and collect material and bring it back to Earth. It was launched in '99, brought it back in 2006. Stardust flyby of the Temple 1, because of the failure, because of the NASA blunder of the wrong perspective of the past, which would have made the Temple 1 a complete failure. But what kept it from being a complete failure is that Stardust space probe had enough fuel left to be redesignated to go look at the Temple 1 comet to find out what the deep impact, what happened when the copper impactor hit the Temple 1 comet, because you couldn't tell by the deep impact probe, which we'll talk about later. The dual asteroid redirection test, the DART, that was in 2022, we sent a space probe up to collide with the DART, with the Dimorphos moon of the Didymus asteroid, to redirect it to see if we could protect the planet from an asteroid with our name by hitting it and redirecting it. And then the OSIRIS-REx mission to asteroid Bennu, and the Lucy mission observation of asteroid Dinkinesh, which we'll be talking about towards the end, and the Hayabusa Japanese mission to asteroid Ryugu, which also all these were conceived with the wrong idea of what they were going to get to. So this is an important YouTube video that is called "The Image NASA Didn't Want to Receive from the Deep Impact Probe." What they didn't want to see is a flash of light that kept them from seeing the crater that the impactor made. And the reason why there was a flash of light that blinded the camera was because they didn't have the right perspective of what made up the Temple 1 comet. And so this video I've cut up into several sections that total about 8 minutes, where you can listen to yourself, listen for yourself what, basically NASA is now admitting about their failures in each one of these missions and trying to put a happy face on it while they're doing so.
Head on. This was done for a few reasons. First, the front of the comet wasn't.
And this is talking about, they're talking about how they sent the impactor to the Temple 1 comet to smash into it, and they wanted to do it in a way that they would be able to see the impact and see the crater that was made on what they thought was a solid comet.
Light, which would allow for better pictures to be taken. Second, it would allow a greater accumulated speed to be reached, resulting in greater kinetic force. And on the 4th of July, 2005, just 1 second out from the anticipated arrival time, the impactor hit. And what a magnificent spectacle it produced. Scientists were thrilled that they had struck so accurately. Deep Impact's payload had been traveling at 37,000 kilometers per hour and had struck with a force of 19 billion joules of kinetic energy. This produced the bright flash you see here, the energy of which is roughly equivalent to 5 tons of TNT. This flash was much brighter than scientists expected.
Much brighter, because they thought it was solid. And what the impactor did is threw up billions of pieces of fine dust, dirt, rocks that reflected the sunlight so much that it blinded their cameras from being able to see the impact.
Up the surface of Temple 1. However, ironically, the success of the first part of the mission caused an unexpected negative side effect. A large dust cloud was kicked up by the impact, which obscured the flyby's view of the impact crater. Dust outgassed from the comet for the next 13 days, peaking 5 days in, which made it hard to see the results of this interstellar bullseye. Although it did offer some interesting insights into the internal pressures going on inside the comet. Around 5 million kilograms of water and between 10 and 25 million kilograms of dust were ejected from Temple 1 in that time.
Which they did not expect. And we got to keep in mind, this was 2005, $240 million mission that, had it not been for the space probe Stardust having enough fuel, would have been a complete waste of money and therefore a NASA blunder.
Fortunately, scientists were able to rely on other eyes, at least to capture images of.
And those other eyes are the Stardust mission. So in the Stardust mission, the plan of Stardust was to launch a probe that would go and collect material from the Wild-2 comet's tail and bring it back to Earth. And it was a very successful mission. But here's what they said. Back
to the late 1990s, when cometary science was even more patchy. Although by this point we had sent 6 probes up to visit these enigmatic celestial bodies, not very much was known about their origins. It was believed at the time that comets were foreign visitors to our solar system, older than the Sun, having been formed from the loose pre-solar grains of dust that orbit other stars, before drifting through space towards us, only to be caught up in the Sun's gravitational pull. It was believed that this theory could be confirmed by traveling to one of these comets and picking up some of this loose dust, or stardust, that surrounds them in space. By examining the isotopic composition, scientists would be able to tell if it was unusual when compared to the dust given off by our own star.
Okay, so what did they find?
Back to the late 1990s.
Visual surprises. So when the Stardust space probe got to the Wild-2 comet, they were shocked and surprised. This is a $200 million project. And so then we'll see what they say about that.
But on the 2nd of January 2004, it finally arrived at its target, comet Wild-2. And what it found was immediately extraordinary. Scientists had not expected much from Wild-2. Some NASA scientists described their expectation of it to be a rather bland object looking somewhat like a black potato. However, this is not what they found.
And what they're saying is, it looks to us like they might be craters, but they're not impact craters like they would expect for something that was solid. It's a kind of impact crater you would expect for a very loosely held together rock pile that leaves a, crater impact kind of looks that are nothing like what you would hit solid. That's what they're missing here, is because they weren't expecting it to be a loosely held together rock pile.
Instead, the surface of Bill 2 was covered with spiky pinnacles hundreds of meters tall, cliffs, massive holes jetting dust and gas out into space, even on parts of the comet that were pointed away from the sun, and thus were expected to be less reactive. In short, the surface of the comet was unexpectedly alive and self-renewing. Something else was just as notable for its absence: craters. Unlike almost every other body in our solar system with surfaces exposed to space, there were no craters on the surface of Vil 2. This puts it in stark contrast to places like Mars or our own moon. Given the period of time Vil 2 is thought to have existed, it surely must have encountered other objects which impacted with it. So where had these craters gone? It shows that the comet's surface can either be self-renewing or active,
which is only because it reforms itself after impact, because it is just a rock pile. And this is what they learned from Temple 1 too. They impacted it and didn't leave a crater, even though they're going to try and say otherwise, as we'll see.
Signs of visible craters over short time frames, astronomically speaking.
This is what Dr. Brown predicted the day before the Stardust space probe that scooped up the comet tail dust, brought it back to Earth the day before that probe landed. Dr. Brown wrote this to Dee McClellan, a NASA fellow and actually part of your group at times. And this is what he wrote to her. I explained to you on the phone 99 that to ask Dr. Brownlee why crystalline minerals, as opposed to amorphous, meaning no water, crystals form in water, as compared to minerals that form without water, which doesn't give the crystalline shape, should be found in comets. As I recall, you told me that Brownlee's response was that he didn't believe the data. See, data was already coming in that there's crystalline material being found in comets and asteroids. And he goes, I don't believe it because it's too impossible. And if crystalline materials are brought back by stardust, which they were, a good question to ask Brownlee is, how did crystalline material form in outer space? How do you get water, liquid water, to cause crystals to form in outer space? The dust particles will be mostly crystalline and silicates. Olivine will be found. And down to the bottom blue here, highlight, according to all theories for the origin of comets, except for the hydroplate theory, the water in comets should never have been liquid because outer space is too cold, especially where comets are thought to have been formed. And that's true, yet they have found crystalline and other minerals, clays, and other things that can only form in the presence of water, in the presence of liquid water in some cases, completely supporting the premise that they were jettisoned from the earth in the flood of Noah. And now, what did they actually find? Exactly what Walt Brown
predicted. Taking the samples back to the lab, scientists learned another completely unexpected fact about Comet Vil 2. It was not a visitor to our solar system at all. Unlike what had previously been believed, Comet Vil 2 had not originated from another star. It had been born from our own. By comparing the isotopic composition of the particles stardust collected with the samples from our own solar system, it was proven that Comet Vil 2 originated from the solar system.
Now think about this. It originated from the solar system. That's what they concluded. This didn't come from someplace else. It's too much like Earth. It's too much like our solar system.
And contrary to what all the ice on its surface might lead you to believe, the rock at its center was formed under white-hot conditions.
And the only explanation they're going to give for that is that somehow, that item had gotten really close to a solar nebula to get to thousands of degrees, which are chondrules. They're finding chondrules and other things that you have to get between 2,600 and 3,300 degrees. Yet, if that material was jettisoned from the pillars and the places where the crust was landing on the mantle and it would have turned it to thousands of degrees very easily and then jettisoned it up into space.
Chondrules and calcium aluminium inclusions were both found among the samples Stardust collected. These are structures that only form under incredibly hot conditions and can be found in other asteroids between Mars and Jupiter. So scientists had to rethink their theory that comets formed in cold conditions at the edge of solar systems, even if they do spend some time there. Both fire and ice go into making comets. And thanks to the careful, delicate way that the particles had been collected, scientists were able to find out one last surprising thing: the amino acid glycine. Amino acids are the building blocks that make up proteins that are vital for all living things. Although this does not mean that there was anything alive on Cometville 2, this does lend weight to the idea that it was from comets such as this, crashing into our Earth millions of years ago, that life's first building blocks found their way to our planet, which I'm sure you all agree offers a tantalizing glimpse into our own origins.
That's a horrible deception that is a result of not being out there with a voice, as all Christian creationists, flood scientists, people with Dr. Brown's 100% consistent with the hydroplate theory, 100% consistent with science, predicting all these things that they found. If we would have had that in the classrooms of colleges and universities, this would be foolishness to everybody. Why are you saying we were seeded by stuff that formed the building blocks of life in the absolute zero temperatures, near absolute zero temperatures, and total vacuum of space, when it can't be, they can't figure out how to do these things on Earth? And then here's the star by flyby. And so then, because Stardust brought this material back, and the Stardust space probe that dropped the collection container back on Earth, it still had enough fuel to redesignate the Stardust space probe to go back to Temple 1 to go see if it could see the crater that the copper impactor made.
Scientists had to wait for hours for the images from Stardust to arrive back, but when they did, NASA saw that they'd managed another bullseye. They'd correctly predicted the rotation of Temple 1 to an accuracy of a single degree. Right on Temple 1's surface.
Okay, now what they're going to say, the circle right here, that's where they know the Temple 1 copper impactor hit. That's what they know was the location that it hit. When Stardust flew by, this is the area where the impactor hit. Now, you and I can look at that picture and say, we don't see any crater here. There's nothing there because it hit into a floating rock pile. It didn't create a crater, but they're going to say it created a crater.
The crater that had been left by Deep Impact's payload. The mission was a success. From the images Stardust took, scientists were able to calculate that it was approximately 150 meters across, so 50% larger than they were predicting. From this, they learned that the surface of Temple 1 was a very fluffy material, made from more dust than was expected, and finer in substance than a powdered snowbank. The surface was incredibly porous. In fact, they were able to estimate that 75% of the comet was actually empty space.
Now, think about that. I mean, it so loosely came together, which when you think about anything coming together in space, without an atmosphere, it's just like impossible for a bunch of rock to decide to get together in space. But yet that's what happened. And yet it's so loosely packed, perfectly explained by the hydroplate theory, that like 75% of that was empty space.
The whole thing held loosely together by gravitational forces. From analysis of the plume that had been ejected from Temple 1 after the impact, scientists were able to identify several interesting material components, including clays, silicates, sodium, and even organic material. While not life itself, these heavily rich carbon materials may have been carried to Earth by comets in the past, providing the vital materials that make up life here. Not only that, but they were able to see other changes that had taken place on Temple 1's surface. 3 pits that had formerly existed had merged to become one. A cliff face had eroded back around 20 to 30 meters. This indicated that Temple 1's surface was a dynamically changing place, leading to interesting questions about how these formations had formed in the first place that scientists could now puzzle over.
From now until they die centuries into the future, unless they embrace the hydroplate theory, that there was at one point all the material of this asteroid was ejected with the same velocity, the same trajectory into space with the water environment around it, water molecule environment around it, that allowed it all to come together. And it is so loosely held together, it changes its look just by the changing gravitational attraction as basically as a building starts to collapse down because of the very loose forces. When I said you can't see a crater there, I want to use, this from planetary.org, February 27th, Stardust at Temple 1, the second trip to a comet, because the first trip to the comet was a waste of money. So they had to use the second Stardust trip to go see if they could go see the crater. Now, of course, if you spend hundreds of millions of dollars to go make the crater, you want to be able to find it. Otherwise, you are a blunder. Your mission was a blunder. This is what this article says, which is not to say that the impact crater was obvious. I was hoping for a splashy feature around an obvious circular hole, but there was no visible splash. It was more subdued than the science team expected it to be. It took some really detailed comparisons of the old and the new pictures from Deep Impact and Stardust to confirm that there really were changes to the surface. After some judicious image processing and seeing things that aren't there, I'm going to add, you can make out an irregular shaped rim about 100 feet or 50 meters across and a mound in the middle. What that crater tells us, co-investigator Peter Schultz said, is that the surface of the comet where we hit it is weak and fragile. It's fluffy. Exactly what HPT would predict, not what any other theory can explain. So NASA, and the final one here is NASA's summary of comets were formed inside of our solar system.
Comets are truly fascinating things. And it was thanks to the incredible work of the Stardust probe and the Deep Impact mission that we were able to learn a great deal about their inner composition and workings. While still retaining their beauty, we have pierced through their layers of enigma. We understand that they are not some foreign visitors, but originate here, from our own solar system, and may have even led to the blossoming of life itself on this planet. And it was human ingenuity and precision that allowed these discoveries to be made. So,
glory be to man is what he's saying, and yet they're completely ignoring the God elephant in the room.
The next time you see a comet, with its beautiful tail flaring out across space away from it, it will no longer be quite so mysterious or foreboding. They may even be the reason you are here today. And all it took to learn this was to catch the dust from one and to punch another really, really hard.
Yeah. So that's what the world's ideas are. The hydroplate theory has predictions of everything that they found. Prediction 30 in Walt Brown's book. Some comets, asteroids, meteors will be found to be made of crystalline material and forged in extreme heat, as we've already said, proved by space probes from NASA. Some large near parabolic comets the solar system will have moons, proved, as we will soon see. Asteroids are rock piles, often with internal ice acting as a weak glue. That's why the Temple 1 comet, which, asteroids have given off water. There's water inside of asteroids that are now solid ice, and so they're not the atmospheric, they're not atmospheric molecules anymore. Large rocks that began the capture process are near the centers of asteroids. That was confirmed. And so there's, hydroplate theory has made predictions that come true. So we say, all scientists and taxpayers, because we've helped finance these $1 billion worth of space probes, that they're all working for Walt Brown. What they find is consistent with the hydroplate theory. And this is a list, I'm running out of time here. This is a list of everything they found: DNA fragments, complex organic molecules, amino acids, rounded boulders, only can be explained by the hydroplate theory. You know, contact binaries. You can look at previous, studies that I've given to TCC last time I was here about contact binaries. We're going to get a little bit more into that. So everything that they have found is consistent with the hydroplate theory. And it argues against the creation origin. Because if God created asteroids and comets in the beginning, and they want to ignore the fact that they had, some of them had our name on it by colliding with the Earth, they have to explain, okay, God can do what he wants to, but is he really going to make asteroids with complex DNA fragments on it, organic molecules, amino acids? Is he going to put those on comets and asteroids so it can deceive people into thinking that Earth was planted by asteroids and comets with the building blocks of life? Or is it better to say the life planet ejected a bunch of this stuff into space, and we're now investigating it for the purpose of saying, wow, the flood really did happen, just like Genesis 7, 11, and 12 said. Multi-billion-dollar space missions created blunders and exposed their false paradigm. Evidence from these same missions support the hydroplate theory predictions based on asteroids, comets being the result of the fountains of the great deep rupturing from under the crust. The biggest blunder to date was NASA's DART mission. Last time I was with you, we only knew that it was launched, and now it's been launched, and they accomplished it. It was launched on the 24th of 2021. It hit the Dimorphos moon of the Didymus asteroid on September 26, 2022. And this was the video that I showed to you, I think, last time. This is what they thought they were going to do, is crash the dual asteroid redirection test space probe into this asteroid, make a nice little crater in the solid moon, which would make it go around to slow down its orbit. This is what really happened, and I'm speeding it up. There was more to that animation. This is what they really found.
Yeah. All right. 2 minutes out.
Now, this is important.
Not look like one single rock to me.
Oh, boy, we're getting close.
Did you,
14,000.
okay, did you hear that? She said, it doesn't look like one single rock to me, because this is the mother asteroid Didymus, and they can see it's a rock pile. And now this is the Dimorphos, which they're going to be crashing into. And so now the rest of the time, the head of this project here with NASA, this lady, is just getting all excited that it looks like they're going to hit right into the center of this, which they do. And that was it was a very successful mission as far as hitting this thing. But the mission was conceived with the idea this moon was solid. And they're going to think that they're going to smack this moon and change its orbital period around the mother asteroid by smacking it and changing its velocity. They thought that they were going to change the orbital period by 7 seconds. What they ended up doing is changing it by 33 minutes, which is proof that this Dimorphos asteroid moon had way less mass than what they were expecting, because they thought they were going to hit a dump truck with a car. And what they ended up hitting is an SUV with a car. And so you're going to have much more impact on what you're hitting if it doesn't weigh as much. And then I want you to notice, as you were zooming in here, that it's a rock pile. And the closer you get, the more you see it's a rock pile. And if you've had courses in orbital physics, to think about how it's even possible, it's impossible for rocks and dust and dirt of various sizes to come together in space. It's impossible without an environment of molecules of air to slow it down. So they're getting all excited here, and we're going to get in and see, I think, this last frame. What does that look like? It looks like that is, ladies and gentlemen, that is Earth from 5,000 years ago put into space. That's what it is. And so then it hits and collides. And just like the Temple 1, which was years earlier, just like Temple 1, they can't find, they sent a probe to watch the impact, to see what the crater did, and it blinded that probe, so it made it unable, they don't know what happened because the same blinding happened. They repeated their ignorance of what comets and asteroids are made out of. So then I wrote this prediction. I said the day after that impact, which I watched live on TV, any plan to deflect an asteroid will have to be based on assumptions about the composition. I'm sorry. In 2016, 6 years before impact, I wrote this to Dr. Brownlee of the University of Washington, who I had had conversations with at the University of Washington when he was telling everybody about the Stardust results. I talked to him personally, gave him Dr. Brown's Common Asteroid chapters. I then talked to him on the phone when he admitted publicly, and it was news all over the world, that they found glycine. And then I felt like writing him this letter afterwards. The physics behind a chosen plan to work for one composition of deflecting an asteroid, solid rock, but will fail if the asteroid consists of loosely held together rock pile. With data continuing to support that Dr. Brown may be right, and with the importance of knowing what comets and asteroids are made of, should one be out there with our name on it, wouldn't it be worth it to get together, because he lives here in Washington, at the University of Washington, for an hour or two to discuss, just in case, off the record? And he didn't answer that. And when I mentioned to him in the phone call that Dr. Brownlee, everything that we know about comets and asteroids are supported by the fact that it was material and water that was jettisoned from the Earth. And he did not hang up on me. And at the end of the conversation, he said, could you please give me the website address for Dr. Brown again? So Dr. Brownlee did not answer this email, though. And so at the time I wrote this, I didn't even know that the DART mission was being conceived. I just knew that they were thinking of doing these kind of tests, blowing them up with a nuke or whatever. I didn't even know about DART. And then after the DART mission hit, after the day that I saw it, since DART confirmed what all HPT advocates suspected would be the case, that it's a rock pile, I thought I should take a stab at predicting what the IKEA cube cameras will show, which is a big flash, is what it turned out to be. And then I used the analogy of that probe was hitting, instead of pool balls on a pool table in a plane in a rack of a triangle, the DART hit, it hit a round millions of rocks of various different sizes, hitting millions of rocks at various sizes and shapes and dust throughout, all combined in a somewhat spherical shape, transferring energy from the impact site to the rocks in the immediate area, which then transfers some of the energy to the rock next to them. Bottom line, it's going to eject a bunch of material from the Dimorphos asteroid with escape velocity. It's going to send rock all over the place, just like you would on a pool table. I would suspect that this would result in Dimorphos having some of its surface rocks being accelerated away from the surface to escape Dimorphos. Brian Nickel estimated that all it would take for that to happen is 4 inches per second. Therefore, any rock on the surface that receives enough impact energy to accelerate at 4 inches in a direction other than going to the main asteroid Didymos will escape and go into their own orbits around the sun. And that would cause a meteor shower, that this stuff could come and impact the Earth, even though they had promised us that this mission would have no detriment to the Earth. And it turns out that, and it's going to be pulverized. There's going to be a flash of light. There's going to be a complete blinding flash of light, larger reflection that's going to be seen from Earth-based space probes. But one thing is for sure, the DART mission planners thought they would be hitting a solid asteroid, which was based on a Big Bang paradigm. of how asteroids were formed. The results of DART tests were exactly as predicted by HPT, not by me. People say, Kevin, you predicted. Nope, it's just physics predicts it. HPT predicts the physics of why they were made, what would happen if you hit a round, relatively round moon that is made up of millions of rocks. This is what was found when it hit. This is what the Lycaea cube saw, exactly like Temple 1. Blinded the screen. They should have known that what should have happened is they should have put that camera that was following the impact, they should have put it back several days from what they learned on Temple 1. They should have had it come days and days later. But instead, it got blinded. The camera was useless. This is what was seen by Earth-based telescopes when the collision occurred. This right here is the Didymus Dimorphos asteroid, and it hits, and this is the debris field that is being ejected into space, into their orbits around the sun. And this is the comet. It left a comet tail. It left this tail of debris that showed light for days and days and days. And so then NASA came clean with the fact that the NASA asteroid deflection test accidentally creates a boulder swarm that could impact the Earth. It turns out, years later, or many, many months later, they did a computer analysis of all the debris, and it turns out that in the next several thousand years, there's not a single chance of any of that debris hitting Earth. But it removed 37 boulders from Dimorphos, now zooming through space. They were seen by Hubble telescope, ranging from 22 feet across. And this is, and see these little blue dots here. These are all what Hubble telescope is picking up as ejected debris from the Dimorphos asteroid rock pile. Why? Because they didn't know what formed Dimorphos. And then this is a recent article, April of 2024. Asteroid debris from NASA's successful DART mission may strike Mars. So when they did the computer analysis of the orbits of all this ejected material, they found out, well, it's going to get really, really close to Mars in over 1,000 years. And so initial observations that the collision shortened the moonlet's orbit by 32 minutes, surpassing the 73 seconds, and significantly changed the asteroid's shape. The DART mission's unexpected findings served as a powerful reminder of the complex and interconnected nature of our solar system. We must remain vigilant in monitoring the consequences of our actions, the blunders of our actions, of having the wrong idea of what we're doing when we go up into space, hitting things. The reshaping of Dimorphos is, and this is another one, asteroid hit by NASA spacecraft was reshaped by the collision study finds. The reshaping of Dimorphos is completely outside of the realm of physics as we understand it, said Christina Thomas. And when I read that, I thought, it's not completely outside of the realm of physics as we understand it. That's exactly what would happen to an asteroid if you smacked it and it was made out of a bunch of rocks that were all loosely held together. And then she said, this has overreaching implications for planetary defense, exactly what I had written 6 years earlier to Dr. Brownlee, that, hey, you have to have the right perspective of the past of what made these things if you're going to have a redirection test. Therefore, we must have encountered anything from the monolithic body, essentially a large boulder the size of Dimorphos, to a cohesionless rubble pile or anything in between. So while the impact outcome came as a surprise to most, it was one of the predicted scenarios. So that now they're saying this was one of the predicted scenarios, but there was less than 3 months before it impacted Dimorphos. There was a paper that came out by a Dr. Sabina Radican that predicted, well, what if it is a floating rock pile? I hadn't read that before I wrote my predictions and stuff, but they wrote this article just in case as the minority report, because they were realizing that what we are finding out is these things are like Temple 1. They found out it was 70% open volume, and they were surprised. So still in finding that Dimorphos as a rubble pile, after all, adds support to the idea. This is in red because this is absolutely impossible. That the asteroid was formed by material flung out from Didymus, the mother asteroid, long ago per the European Space Agency. So this was the test. This was the research paper that came out 2 months before impact. And and they predicted, and I didn't know about this, instead of leaving a relatively small crater, DART's impact at a speed of around 24,000 kilometers to, 14,000 miles an hour would completely deform Dimorphos. That's exactly what happened. And the asteroid could also be deflected much more strongly, which is what happened. And all it took, and they were saying, well, we couldn't do any of this analysis in the past because we didn't know enough about asteroids. But it's very easy. If you think it's a rock pile, the physics come to that conclusion very easily. The European Space Agency cannot explain how a very loose internal structure similar to a pile of rubble that is held together by gravitational interactions and small cohesive forces. They know that's what it is, but they can't explain how it got there, how that happened. So getting back to this article about how it was reshaped, they're saying that this mother asteroid spun up miraculously, started spinning by non-gravitational forces to spin up until it ejected at its equator with enough centrifugal force the material that became this moon. That's what they're saying.
Continent on Earth.
Absolutely impossible. Stuff would have been flinging off in millions of different angles and directions and never gone to decide to become a moon. But that's what they're coming up with because they've got to come up with their own monkey to man fairy tale because they don't have an answer. And so then I called Christina Thomas, who is the professor of the lead of the DART redirection test analysis. And this is what she said, completely outside the realm of physics as we understand it. And this is what I wrote her, and I'm gonna, this is when I called her, I'm reading what I wrote down right after I talked to her so I wouldn't forget. I asked her what she meant by that quote. And she said that I didn't mean that we don't know physics, it's just that physics aren't the same as on Earth. Well, that was kind of comforting because otherwise I was gonna have a hard time with what she learned in physics. She believes that binary asteroids are formed by the mother asteroid increasing its spin speed and centrifugally sending the debris out. I countered that this explanation defies orbital physics. There is no way that in the vacuum of space, rock piles could just come together to be loosely held by just gravity. And see, for her to say that rock pile of Dimorphos spun off of Didymus, that means that Didymus has to be a floating rock pile, and they can't explain how that formed in space. I stated that scientists thought that it was impossible for asteroids or comets to have moons, but now hundreds have been found. Then scientists were shocked when they discovered that some asteroids and comets are contact binaries, and now they are surprised to find that asteroids have floating rock piles. I said that she knows and I know that if the two of us were in the vacuum of space and I just gave her a push, that we would never see each other again. So how did these rock piles come together if just a small little collision would create a varying velocity that they would never come together again? And then she admitted to me, she responded that the science of asteroid formation is still being studied and that they are not yet able to completely explain these findings that they're coming up with. And when she told me about this formation, I said, well, when I was in my orbital physics class, Dr. Meiskin would have absolutely flunked me for saying that an asteroid could all of a sudden spin up and cast out debris from the equator that would all become a moon, Dimorphos. He would have flunked me for saying that in a physics class. There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. We recently sent a space probe called Lucy that is on its way to go to it's in the asteroid belt, and it's on its way after another velocity boost from the Earth later on to go to Jupiter's orbit to go study the comets that are in the Lagrange points, the Trojans of the planet Jupiter in front of and behind its orbital path. So that's what it's ultimately going to do. But while it's going there, it went by the Dinkinish asteroid that's that's in the asteroid belt. We never suspected anything so bizarre of what the Lucy probe saw at Dinkinish. It saw here, when the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. If that debris pile that was the Dinkinish asteroid at one time had an atmosphere of water molecules and nitrogen, oxygen, whatever, that was there to help slow things down, perfectly explainable. Without that, they can't explain it. And this is what it said in that article. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, oh yeah, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. And then this is another one. The researchers think, another article, NASA Lucy images reveal asteroid Dinkinish to be surprisingly complex. The researchers think some of the material in the disk formed the moon, the same spinning, somehow miraculously spinning up Dinkinish to cast off its stuff to go become the moon. That stuff isn't going to come off and become a moon that's right next to it is another moon that is just barely touching each other. And that's why it goes on to say details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out, except for advocates. And this is the history of moons. They thought it was impossible for there to be a moon of an asteroid. Asteroids that flew past, this was an article back in 2015 where, wow, we found another asteroid with a moon. So here's the moon, another one with a moon. And then this is out of HPT, the hydroplate theory, 9th edition. Walt, quotes out of one of his references. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space, which is why now they're coming up with the impossible idea of an asteroid that spins off a moon from spinning up orbitably around its own axis with forces that are not explained and are not possible. And so it is even more impossible for an asteroid moon to be formed but from debris jettisoned from a mother asteroid by centrifugal force. God provided Dinkinish's contact binary moon to refute this fantasy. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory. And then I'm going to show you just one more thing. This is an OSIRIS-REx mission, $1 billion, that went to the asteroid Bennu. Look at that asteroid. What is it? A floating rock pile. What did they think it would be? Solid. and what they found are minerals, magnesium, sodium phosphate that are necessary, water soluble, necessary for the backbone of DNA. Completely, no one expected it except HPT advocates. And then I want you to really look at this. To see this right here, this is while the probe, it had a long arm with a collection plate at the end of the leg, at the end of the arm, that was, they designed it to come down and kind of smash onto the surface to bring up some debris that would then, as it pulled away, it would go into the collection chamber. What they found, and they had a time delay before the thrust would move it away from the Bennu asteroid. And what they found out is that time delay almost trashed $1 billion mission because it kept going down. It buried itself. That arm buried itself in the asteroid because it's a loosely held together rock pile. And it fired off just before it would have been, completely, down into the asteroid. And what they found are that it suggests that Bennu had a watery past. They analyzed the samples and got very surprised that it is part of a long gone ocean world. This asteroid came from a long gone ocean world, which I say is a little presumptive considering that they and we are living on the ocean world that Bennu came from. And the Hayabusa, we're almost at the very end here. Hayabusa 2 mission confirms return of an asteroid sample. So now here's what happened. The Japanese sent a probe, Hayabusa 2, to an asteroid Ryugu, and this is what it found. What is that? A floating rock pile. And they sent, different probes. It dropped down different probes to go around and look for minerals and, get data and take pictures. And what they found out is that, in fact, scientists working on both missions believe it's possible that these two asteroids once belonged to the same larger parent body. They're finding the same thing on Ryugu that they found on Bennu, which was that it came from a watery world. And so it must have been part of the same larger parent body, HPT advocates, Earth. They came from Earth. Before, they say, before it was broken apart by an impact. Well, Earth hasn't been broken apart by an impact. It just jettisoned the stuff in the past and the flood stopped. The evidence is clear. All evidence, Temple 1, Build 2, Dimorphos, Bennu, Ryugu, and other visited comets and asteroids are consistent with Dr. Brown's premise. They formed inside the solar system when debris and water was ejected from the Earth during the flood of Noah about 5,000 years ago. Takeaways: having a wrong perspective of the past, evolution, Big Bang results in blunders and bad science. Having a correct perspective of the past, creation, HPT theory of Noah's flood allows accurate predictions and explains observable facts, becoming a powerful tool in witnessing the gospel to the lost. Creation flood advocates who embrace wrong perspectives of the past, including plate tectonics, and therefore CPT, end up creating poor apologetics. CPT, catastrophic plate tectonic theory for the flood, is not biblical. It isn't Genesis 7:11 compliant. It's not biblical in 1,000 different ways, and therefore it can't be the truth. Maybe not 1,000 ways, but it can explain how the whole Earth got covered with water at one time to 22.5 feet. It can explain the thousands of square miles of sedimentary layers laid down in horizontal layers that are then bended and folded, in which hydroplate theory can explain by the compression event. The Bible doesn't say that there were tidal waves or mega tsunamis that went over the Earth. It says that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the water continued to go up for 100 until 150 days, which is not part of CPT is not part of that. And John Baumgartner recently admitted the fact that multiple miracles are necessary for CPT to work. And you don't need miracles for what the hydroplate theory proposes. Those who reject biblical creation, the flood of Noah, manufacture fairy tales and attempt to explain life and objects in our solar system. But the biblical Christian who loves the truth will reject all fairy tales made by man and use that knowledge to reject the deceptions and be a witness to others if they use HPT. The Bible concludes that the world right now is preserved for another time of judgment. Instead of flood, it will be fire. The book of Revelation says that asteroids, comets, it implies by the description of something like a great mountain with a fiery tail coming and hitting the earth. Sounds like an asteroid impact, which could easily break up the crust and cause massive volcanic activity, and which the Bible says is going to be global earthquakes that are going to be occurring. It's reserved for fire until the day of judgment. So, and a lot of my peers are starting to believe in a flat earth. How would you defend biblically and scientifically that the earth is a sphere? Actually, for those that follow Mike Snavely's newsletter, he's done a 3-week session on that you could contact him. But I mean, there's so many reasons. I mean, the people that the Bible says that God stand over the circle of the earth. There truly are astronauts in space that you can't go into orbit. You can't put up the star. I have a Starlink system at my house, and that's because there are thousands of Starlink satellites that have been put into space. You can't go into a orbital. You can't go into orbit around a flat mass. And especially since we know what the mass of the earth is, because what we know that the force of gravity of 32 feet per second squared on earth is a result of a certain known mass, and that mass cannot stay in a flat plane. It would force itself into a round position. Everything wants to be round. The asteroid Cirrus, which is the largest asteroid, it's more round than a lot of the peanut-shaped asteroids, which are contact binaries and everything else, because it has enough mass that it's forced itself into a sphere. Everything wants to be into the most compact, stable condition, which for a lot of mass is a round object. It is really embarrassing for Christians to be flat earthers. I mean, people with knowledge will think that you don't have all the tools in the toolbox.
Maybe too late for some.
And I actually was at ICR's headquarters in Dallas a couple of years ago, and spoke to Randy Galusa had me talk to their scientists for all day long, basically about the subject before all the data was in from these different space probes that I covered today. And one of the people that was there was from a board meeting, and he had more time and space than anybody else. And he's getting asked all the time as a Christian. He's getting asked from church people and stuff, you're just covering it all up. You're just creating a great deception. And so I heard about that. And so when I met him, I said, hey, when I wonder what's it like on the, how thick is it? How thick is it when you go around the corner? And he said, oh man, forget that. You should see what's on the other side. So he was goofing around with me. I mean, he just goes nuts. He's been in space. He's looked out the glass, and he knows the earth is round. It's a sphere. I hope that helps.
One more question, yeah.
Could you define the contact binary?
Okay, a contact binary, and actually, a contact binary means that when the debris field went out into space, and the best place to go is Brian Nickel, and I see that he's online here. If you go to his YouTube channel, he shows exactly animates how contact binaries are formed. Really strongly recommend that you go there. But I'll try and hand wave you here. As the debris field goes out into space, there's going to be big rocks and little rocks. So the big rocks are going to have more gravity than the little rocks. So if there's a debris field that has two relatively big rocks that are going out and they're separate from each other, then they're going to collect their own debris, their own smaller rocks, dust, water molecules and everything, and they're going to coalesce into two different asteroids. Well, they're also going to be in relative motion around each other. And if the water molecules and air molecules are in that sphere of influence long enough, then they will slow down the relative motion between those two bodies that have collected their debris, and they will slowly come together and just touch. And then there are contact binary. They found asteroids that are binary, but they're not contact binary because they ran out of gas before the asteroid moon touched and came together. They're finding asteroids with 3 bodies that are orbiting each other. And they have, what we just saw was an asteroid that had 2 asteroids right with it that were the same size, and they came together and touched each other, but the atmosphere is gone so that all 3 of them haven't come together and touch each other. And here's a hydroplate prediction. When that Lucy probe gets out into the gravity well, the gravity well, the Lagrange points of Jupiter, they're going to be finding things that are going to absolutely blow their mind. There's going to be double contact binaries. There's going to be, because they're in this very, very tenuous gravity well holding this material in, and so it's very easy for things to come close to each other, and they're going to be finding things that are going to blow them away. So did that help you to understand contact binary? Binary means 2 things going around. Contact binary, they came together. The most famous contact binary was the 67P asteroid. That's why a lot of asteroids look like peanuts, because you have the body of, for 67P, they said the big one is the body of the duck and the little one is the head. They make it look like, they say it's a duck asteroid. And so the little one, the head, came together, and they know that they came together. They know that the head got put onto the duck body, and they have no idea how that could happen, but they know it happened.